Good morning, good night, and good afternoon. And it's really nice to see all of you here and join our panel today. I wish to begin the panel by acknowledging the voluntary people of the Kulin Nations, the traditional owner of the land on which the panel from my end is taking place, and the internet infrastructure is established and maintained. So I'm currently based in Melbourne, Australia, and pay my respect to their land and their elders, past, present, and future. And today we have three speakers. We have three panel speakers. Viktor, Denisenko. Excuse me if I do not pronounce your name right. He's a professor. He's an associate professor at General Jonathan Mattis Military Academy of Lithuania and Vilnius University. Please feel free to correct me if I do not pronounce those names right. He got his PhD in communication and information in 2016, and at Vilnius University, the field of his scientific and professional interests include propaganda, information warfare, and political communication. Viktor is the author of the book Encirclement of Propaganda, published with Vilnius University Press in 2021. And I'm going to introduce all the panel speakers all together, and then we'll move forward to our presentations. Grigorij Mesežnikov, I'm sorry, pardon me, is a political scientist, president of the Institute for Public Affairs, Bratislava, Slovakia. He has published numerous expert studies on party systems, development, and political aspects of transformation in post-communist societies, illiberal and authoritarian tendencies, populism, extremism, nationalism, and hybrid threats in various monographs, collections, and scholarly journals in Slovenia and other countries. He regularly contributes an analysis of Slovakia's political scene to domestic and foreign media. Since 1993, he has been an external correspondent for Radio Liberty, Radio Free Europe. He has edited and authored dozens of books, including the Global Reports on Slovakia from 1995 to 2011. The comprehensive analysis of countries' development in all relevant sectors of society. He is a key author of the report on Slovakia in Nations in Transit, published by Freedom House from 1998 to 2014. In 2006, he was awarded by Reagan Fiscal Fellowship by the National Endowment for Democracy, based in Washington, D.C. In 2012, he was a research fellow of Taiwan Fellowship Program at the Department of Political Science and National Taiwan University in Taipei, where he researched similarities and differences of democratization and fellow of the democratization and civil society development in Taiwan and in Central Europe. In 2019 to 2021, he was a research fellow of the Institute for Human Science, Institute for another word really hard to pronounce, Mesežnikov, von Mesežnikov, in Vienna at the Europe Future Program. And I'm going to introduce our last speaker, Tihomira Doncheva. Is an experienced communicator, researcher, and project manager on multidisciplinary topics related to the problems and challenges, opportunities, and values of the liberal democratic society. She has joined AUBG in the summer of 2022, heading the university's flagship initiatives to reinvigorate AUBG's founding mission. Through the CIDC, Tihomira aims to educate students and interested stakeholders to be engaged, informed, critical, democratic citizens who will be committed to the rule of law, pluralism, and inclusiveness, and open discussion, free press, and respect for human rights. She has worked as a journalist for one of the most professional media outlets, Capital, and has been a researcher for the NATO Strategic Communication Centers of Excellence in Riga. Working on Malay influence across the Western Balkans, over the last 3 years, she worked for a strategic communication company based in London, UK, where her portfolio included a variety of projects from countries countering disinformation, misinformation, propaganda, fake news, media development, and information resilience, to countering violent extremism and terrorism in countries across the Middle East, Africa, Eastern Europe, and Central Asia. She's a published author of reports on information influence activities in the Western Balkans and has also developed 2 separate apps on countering disinformation for journalists. And I am Fan Yang, a research assistant at Deakin University. I work with ESAM, so I will be moderating the panel for this session. So shall we start with Viktor?
Okay, of course. I will share my presentation. It's more pictures here, and I will try to present everything during 15 minutes, I think. Okay, my topic is Kremlin's information war against the collective West, view from Lithuania, but in beginning it will be some remarks. My view may be not only from Lithuania, but in general from Baltic states, 3 Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, because our experience is quite similar in this topic. And also I will talk more about this Kremlin's information war in general. And I will start from some historical background, because it's quite important when we're talking to international audience. So we could start from collapse of Soviet Union. And for Baltic states, it was very important moment in history, because in fact, in 1940, Soviet Union seized Baltic states. It was kind of a hybrid war or hybrid warfare. Today, it's very like a fashionable words, but in general, Soviet Union have this experience to implement some hybrid aggression, and Baltic states were victims of this hybrid aggression. And of course, the collapse of Soviet Union for Baltic states was very meaningful, because it was possibility to back to map of Europe as independent states. And also to choose own geopolitical orientation and own vector of integration. And of course, this vector was integration back to Europe, integration back to, in fact, Western world. Also, I could mention one like a provocative thing. We could ask question when information warfare as phenomenon starts. And I think in many books you could find that this war in Iraq in 1991 was first information war because it was first war broadcasted live. It also was like informational struggles between Baghdad and allies who fight against Baghdad for Kuwait and so on. But also it's very interesting that in Lithuania we could say that, first information war, yes, it was in 1991. And it was in fact in Lithuania. And it was information war between Lithuania and Moscow as a center of still existing Soviet Union. Because in January 1991, it was very painful events in Vilnius. Moscow tried to use Soviet army to break down Lithuanian independence, because Lithuania officially declared re-establishment of independence of a state on March 11, 1999. But of course, Moscow not recognized it. And it was very big tensions between Lithuania and Moscow as a center of Soviet Union. And in January 1991, Moscow used Soviet army. They seized, for example, TV tower, TV center, seized, in fact, Lithuanian television. Also seized press house, and it was, in fact, banned main Lithuanian newspapers at the moment. And some civilian peoples was killed during these events, killed by Soviet army. And Moscow propagate conspiracy theory, which is still Moscow used still. And conspiracy theory was that it's Lithuanians or some powers in Lithuania killed with civil people to accuse, of course, Moscow of brutality and so on. So, in fact, we could say that we know what information war is, and we know how Moscow could use it. Also, first decade after Soviet Union collapse, I could say that Lithuania, but also Latvia and Estonia, we also faced kind of like a propaganda struggle against us. And in this propaganda struggle, Russia used some real tensions and some imaginary tensions. One of the most popular topic of this information struggle was question about Russian minorities in Baltic states, or better to say Russian-speaking minorities in Baltic states. Here also it's a very specific topic, because you should understand, and you could imagine, Soviet Union in fact was like a modern Russian empire in some kind. And it was quite a lot of inner migration in Soviet Union, and in Latvia and Estonia, and also in Lithuania, was quite big Russian or Russian-speaking communities, which in Soviet time was like a part of this imperial majority. And after collapse of Soviet Union, all people who was in Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, with Russian-speaking people, during one night they became national minorities It's another situation for these persons. And also was some real problem in this slide. You could see so-called alliance passport. It's the official name of this passport. It's passport of non-citizen of Estonia. And it was after this collapse of Soviet Union, Estonia and Latvia not automatically provide citizenship for all inhabitants, because Latvia and Estonia, they was afraid that these big Russian-speaking communities could make big influence to political field, and it's kind of threat for Estonia and Latvia. Lithuania provides citizenship for everyone, for everyone inhabitant who wants, because in Lithuania, this Russian-speaking minority is not so big. So, of course, Moscow accused, first of all, Estonia and Latvia of breaking rules, violating rights of national minorities, and so on. But also in this information struggle was quite many like imaginary topics or so on. For example, it's very interesting. Moscow quite painful reacted to every event or incident linked to these Russian-speaking minorities in Baltic states. But in similar situation, when it was most or more painful events, for example, in former Soviet republics in Central Asia, this reaction was much more softer. Why? Because Baltic states choose another geopolitical paradigm. Baltic states choose this integration to Western world, and this states in Central Asia, in fact, they choose this integration paradigm with Russia still. So it was also political thing. Also quite interesting if when we're looking to these narratives of Kremlin propaganda, I could say Baltic states, in fact, was kind of training ground, because many narratives which Russia used later against Ukraine, it's quite similar or a little bit changed for situation in Ukraine, but it's quite similar for narratives which were used against Baltic states, in fact, since collapse of Soviet Union. I'm really sorry, this illustration is in Lithuanian language, is from my article, but I will try explain. It's like here it's narratives about Baltic states. Here it's narratives about propaganda. It's from this Kremlin propaganda, traditional narratives, I could say, and we could find many similarities. For example, that of course Baltic states and Ukraine violating these rights of Russian-speaking people or Russian minorities. But in Baltic states, as well as in Ukraine, it's growing up Nazism, neo-Nazism, fascism, and so on. All bad things from World War II. Yeah. But Baltic authorities of Baltic states are selfish and not care about own society, and authorities of Ukraine, it's not legitimate after Euromaidan, and so on and so on. In reality, it's quite many similarities which allow us to talk about some tradition in these narratives. Also, of course, in Baltic states, we all time were quite critical about Russia, and I could say that on one hand, of course, with painful historical experience, making influence to our evaluation of Russia. On another hand, also we know Russia, and we could like analyze processes in Russian Federation quite well. For example, my native language is Russian. My mother tongue is Russian, and I could quite deeply analyze all these narratives. But during quite long time after the Soviet Union collapse, Lithuania and other Baltic states were evaluated in Western world as alarmists. Yeah, but we are too much afraid about Russia. Russia is not a Soviet Union anymore. Russia not a threat to anyone. Yeah, but of course, in fact, everything changed year 2013. I like this illustration very much. This illustration is from Crimea, and it's poster to so-called referendum in Crimea in March 2013. And it's quite visible as, I could say, primitive propaganda they used for this event, staged by Kremlin, because it's the words are very simple. But during referendum on March 16, we will choose between two possibilities. Yeah, one possibility, of course, Crimea as part of Russia, very peaceful, very nice. Or another possibilities, as you could understood, it's a possibility of Crimea with Ukraine. It's a concentration camp. Yeah, Nazi-style concentration camp. It's very primitive propaganda, but it was used during these events. And if we're talking about, for example, this system of Kremlin propaganda and evaluation of West or collective West, it's also a very interesting thing, because if you will look to narratives of Kremlin propaganda nowadays, you could find what in reality of Kremlin, it's not Russia invite Ukraine. It's Russia defending himself against Ukraine, which is a puppet of Western powers. And in fact, it's a war against Western powers, Western war against Russia. It's also just two examples I could find a lot. And the narrative is similar. One narrative of so-called military expert, and another narrative of Mr. Lavrov, it's Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russian Federation. It's similar messages, that it's Western powers and West push Ukraine to war with Russia. Or in this quotation of Lavrov, but West push Ukraine to continue war against Russia. It's very interesting, and I could say that this system of Kremlin propaganda, definition of sharp power, yeah, it's our topic anyway. It's quite it's good definition for this phenomenon, because this Kremlin grow up a huge machine of propaganda, and this machine have like a different aspects. It's official channels like RT or Sputnik, or some non-official channels, some media which pretend to be like a real journalism, but in reality are just also tool of propaganda. It's also trolls, yeah, trolls phenomenon. We could say And why I could say what sharp power, in fact, is perfect definition, because Kremlin using this system of propaganda also on one hand like an additional tool of hard power, and we could see it today in context of Russian war against Ukraine, but also it could be evaluated as kind of autonomic system to make not visible influence on societies or even political elites of some other states. And one more thing which I want to mention and forgot it mentioned a little bit before, in Lithuania, before this February 24, a few months, journalists asked me as an expert, does it possible like a conventional war of Russia against Ukraine? And I was one of few experts who said that it is possible. It is possible, and not because I am so analytically brilliant, but just because in this Russian or Kremlin propaganda, 4 or 5 months before this conventional war, I saw very clear how they started to push everywhere this one main narrative that it is Western powers, NATO or United States, who pushing Ukraine to war against Russia. And it was kind of deja vu, because something similar I saw in 2008 before war in Georgia. Also 5 days war in Georgia in August 28. I could say maybe what my final remarks, when we looking to this Kremlin propaganda from Lithuania, when we look into Kremlin propaganda from Baltic states or Eastern Europe in general, I could say that way which Russia passed from the collapse of the Soviet Union to war against Ukraine, from our perspective or our point of view, unfortunately, this way was quite logical. And it's not kind of anomaly or something. And maybe here I could just only repeat, unfortunately. So I think I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Viktor. Let's welcome our next speaker, and then let's welcome next speaker, Grigorij. Would you like to share your slides with us?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much for introduction. My name is Grigorij Mesežnikov. I am the head of the Institute for Public Affairs, which is independent analytical center, think tank, and I am political scientist dealing, besides all other things, with the hybrid threats, especially in the last years, and with the Russian information war against Central European countries. So I'm not a newcomer in the sharp power agenda. 5 years ago, International Forum for Democratic Studies published the paper, Sharp Power, Rising Authoritarian Influence, and I'm one of the co-authors of this publication. At that time, 2 countries, 2 states were chosen for analyzing of their sharp power, and 4 countries, so Russia and China, and 4 countries, 4 states in South America and Central Europe also were chosen for analysis of the consequences of the application of soft power by these 2 states in these countries, Argentine, Peru, and Poland and Slovakia. So I am the author of the chapter about Slovakia. why researchers 5 years ago decided to start to conceptualize the issue of sharp power, because the known approach in explaining, describing of activities of states in the field of public diplomacy, presentation of the national experience with social development and so on, the known methods somehow showed themselves not very efficient in case of authoritarian states. So states which were more focused on not on the presentation of positive alternatives of national experience with social development, achievements in public life and economy, but rather they were focused on the promotion of the values which were not in full compliance with the values or social habits or the codes, political, ideological codes in the countries in which they were trying to promote these values. And of course, these were authoritarian states. And I think that Russia, especially in the last years, last 8 years, partially it was because of Russian aggression against Ukraine, and Russia at that time needed to somehow justify their policies. And in the situation when the European countries, majority of European countries, members of European Union, the Western community of states, they started to support Ukraine, and Russia started its activities, information wars, different kind of measures against not only Ukraine, which was the main target of the military power of Russia, but also neighboring countries, alliance of Ukraine in NATO and European Union. I think that it was a crucial moment for researchers to start analyzing the specificity of this so-called public diplomacy, or as we know this term, soft power, but it wasn't really soft power. It was something more brutal, something more really sharp. And how just a couple of sentences about sharp power in hands of authoritarian regimes. So first, this kind of activities and promotion of its influence in other countries, of their authoritarian states, it's malign and aggressive. It has malign and aggressive nature. While authoritarian governance domestically is typical for the states, they also support the authoritarian regimes and authoritarian influence internationally. The main appeal is rather negative, not positive. So not to present some positive alternatives, but rather to destroy something which authoritarian regimes disagree with. Of course, methods of political manipulations, creation of domestic political lobbies, domestic inside the countries in which these methods are applied, but these political lobbies in favor of hostile authoritarian regimes, propaganda expansion, expansion of state media of these states outward, information or rather disinformation aggression, corruption, subversive activities, smear campaigns, and even secret services active measures. So how sharp power mechanism works in Central Europe? I think that there are some peculiarities concerning Russia's system of soft power in Central Europe, and these peculiarities they are related to the fact that the conceptual basis of Russia's soft power mechanism is a full-scale rejection of liberal democracy as a model of social order. And this rejection eventually leads to the formation of international alliances and partnerships between Russia and those social and political forces inside different countries and of different ideological orientations that are considered by Russia itself as an adversary of liberal democracy. So Russia is trying through its soft power to form political environment in these countries. And Central European countries, and I consider Central European region broadly, so from Baltic states through Central Europe, V4 group till the Balkan states and also Black Sea states. So in this region, all these states, the current states, they are post-communist states. 3 Baltic states are post-Soviet states. And of course, it's something which gives Russian soft power specific direction. The system forming framework of the Russian state's policy toward these countries is a combination of great power approach to foreign policy with the rejection, as I said democracy as a principle and principles of free choice of nations. So this policy can be characterized as a mixture of two approaches: geopolitical revisionism, and now we see how Russia applied this method directly in military way toward Ukraine, and socio-political revanchism. Socio-political revanchism of Russian soft power manifests itself primarily in the desire to reverse the social reforms that allowed the countries of Central and Eastern Europe to radically change their internal structure and external orientation, what the current Russian regime views as a development leading to the weakening of the Russia state's position, because I mean, it's typical consideration of development of post-socialist or post-Soviet, some post-Soviet countries after the collapse of communism as a running to the West. So in this perception, Russia is losing something. Russia is losing Ukraine, Russia lost Baltic states, Russia lost Central European states, and Russia, because the perception is that Russia is losing something, and Russian foreign policy de facto from the beginning of creation of Russian Federation was revanchist and revisionist, started to conduct practical steps to reverse this process. Concerning the narratives which Russian soft power is applying in Central European states, I think that especially in V4 countries, but also in the broader region, there are 3, I would say, systemic narratives which Russian propaganda mechanism and Russian soft power uses in Central Europe. The first is I already mentioned, but just a couple of words more. It's a narrative about inappropriateness of liberal democracy for the Central European states. So all this description of liberal democracy as a corrupt, inefficient, non-beneficial for the Central European states, that liberal democracies are not delivering, that liberal democracies cannot provide good conditions of life for these countries. So this narrative is this basic narrative and some offspring smaller situational narratives are very widely spread in our countries. And of course, we can see our domestic promoters of these narratives, all these illiberal, authoritarian, populist forces, either on the right side, I think that they are stronger. It's right-wing populist, neo-Nazi, fascist movement and groups, but also some leftists, which are tending to radical concepts of left movement, communist, neo-communist. So these narratives are promoted by, as I said, Russian soft power, but with the support of domestic actors. The second narrative, which is relevant for some Central European countries, not all of them, but quite substantial portion of these countries. It's a narrative which is presenting the preferring the ethno-linguistic proximity over the universal values. And it's narrative about so-called Slavic solidarity. So in countries with the predominant Slavic population, it's among the former Soviet republics, Ukraine and Belarus, but in Central Europe, it's Poland, Slovakia, Czech Republic, Slovenia, Bulgaria, and other countries of Western Balkans. Russian soft power is trying to persuade people that the linguistic cultural closeness, so the alleged common destiny of Slavic nations, is more important for these nations, for these smaller countries, than adherence to universal values like democracy, freedom, and so on. I think that in some countries these narratives are relatively spread, and they have also some political support about especially nationalist parties. In Slovakia, even fascist parties are following this line. Russian soft power is less successful in Poland, of course, because of experience of Poland with the decades and even centuries of the incorporated state of Poland as a country into Russian Empire, and of course policies, hostile policies of Russian Empire against Poland and Poles. But in other countries, in Slovakia, for example, in Serbia, partially, not enough efficiently, but partially it's still present in Czech Republic, some other states. So what is the real situation? I think that this concept of pan-Slavic solidarity or brotherhood, I think the reality somehow contradicts to the intents of Russia to use this narrative, because today majority of the so-called Slavic countries, they are either in the European Union or in NATO, or they are trying to enter this integration grouping. So the idea that linguistic or cultural closeness of these smaller Central European Slavic nations to Russia can influence their development, I think that, on the level of the practical policies, I think it's not very efficient. So not very efficient, because voluntarily nations of this in this region decided to join the integration process after completing the basic democratization process, and they are members of these integration groupings. But Russian propaganda is still working with this, and in Slovakia you can see this in public discourse, in the statements of some public intellectuals, some politicians, and of course Russia is supporting this. And the third, I would say, systemic creating narrative is narrative about predatory West. It's narrative about unjust and unfair policies of big Western states, Western European states, but of course mostly United States, that they are unfair to the smaller nations, that they do not provide the real protection of these nations, that they used these integration projects only for their own advantage, their own purposes, so that they are squeezing economy of smaller Central European states. We know that reality is different, that generally speaking, countries which joined the European Union and NATO, they are today more prosperous than before, they are better protected, they are stable democracies, they are functional economies, and all parameters of the life in these countries as members of European Union and NATO, they are much better than socioeconomic parameters of Russia. But still the propaganda is working with this. Maybe a couple of words also about some issue which in the last years was quite important for understanding of Russian soft power and its activities in Central Europe. I think that Viktor would agree with me that for Baltic states, it's one of the crucial moment in information aggression of the Russia against Baltic states, but the same is valid for Poland, for Czech Republic, Slovakia, in some degree, in Bulgaria. It's a memory wars. It's a wars between Russian, I would say, propaganda and the nations of the mentioned states about historic events which influence the history of these nations, but influence just under the pressure or aggressive measures of either Russia or the Soviet Union. And all these, I mean, famous cases of statue of Marshal Konev in Prague, or interpretation of Prague Spring, or Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, and some other events which are creating the big discrepancies between Russia and these states, these nations. And I think that it's very good illustration what are the real intentions of Russia concerning these nations and these currently independent states, because Russia is supporting and promoting these narratives in order to reconquer, maybe in different organizational forms, these nations again. So I mentioned this revisionism and revanchism, and one of the typical features of Russian foreign policy today, it's in more visible way today in Ukraine, but I think that our countries are not excluded into this kind of consideration. Reconstructionist approach. So the idea of current Kremlin regime is I mean, their approach is that if something went wrong in the previous development in history of Russia and its relations with other parts of Europe, the neighbors, maybe the former constituent parts of Soviet Union on Russian Empire, then it's possible to fix, it's possible to change, it's possible to reverse. And what now is Russia demonstrating in Ukraine? It's just on the based on revisionism and revanchism. Russia is trying to reconstruct the past in the present, and to provide the future for this kind of approach to social reality. Now, couple of words about, I mean, about these promoters of Russian sharp power in the region. Of course, Russian state propaganda, I think it was well described by many researchers, Russian researchers from our countries, but who are the promoters of Russian external influence here in Central Europe? Are they really only marginal, or they can influence the situation? Unfortunately, they are not marginal. Maybe Poland is a certain exclusion, very specific exclusion, but in other countries, and Baltic states also, they are a bit different, but they're different not mostly because of peculiar ethnic composition of the population. So it means that I would say, vulnerability of these states toward Russian information aggression is related more to the fact that certain portion of the Russian-speaking population is more receptive to Russian propaganda. But in our countries, we do not have Russian diaspora, we do not have Russian minorities. So it means that the promoters of external hostile authoritarian influence coming from Russia, this promotion is done by our local domestic actors, public actors, political actors. And in Slovakia, we have a kind of ecosystem which started forming, and today de facto it's established and formed and started after Russia annexed Crimea and occupied eastern part of Ukraine. And today it's ecosystem of the different actors. So some public intellectuals, some civic organizations, some political parties, not marginal. So fascist parties, we have in Slovakia 2 fascist parties and both are pro-Russian. Then we have the pockets of pro-Russian politicians, including the highest leaders of the parties in the left part of political spectrum. So now it's opposition party, but this party was years and years the ruling party, Smer, social democracy. Smer, its translation is direction to social democracy. And Mr. Fico was prime minister. This party today is very pro-Russian, and there are some leaders of this party, including Robert Fico himself, but even more some others who are openly participating not only in the committed spreading the Russian propaganda, but also they are participating in the public events organized with the Russian embassy, for example, here in Bratislava. And of course, media. Part of the media space in Slovakia is presenting the ideas which are not fully compatible either with our foreign policy orientation, so pro-Western foreign policy orientation, or with the liberal democratic regime. Some of these media are the real media. Some of them are just online platform, but quite frequently visited by the readers. And this ecosystem is activating itself always in the situations when Russian regime or Russian sharp power needs a support. So somehow requires this support. Then there are signals coming from Moscow, and this ecosystem starts to be visible. So they are influencing public discourse, especially now since the end of February, beginning of March. In the case of Russian-Ukrainian war, they are openly or hiddenly on the side of Russia. They are introducing different narratives. Two most popular narratives of this part of public discourse is that we shouldn't, because Slovakia is very supportive toward Ukraine. Slovakia belongs today to the category of states which are supporting Ukraine, I mean, in proportion of its size, population, and budget in the highest possible way. I think that we are on the 6th or maybe 7th place in the world. But our opposition and actors of Russian influence, they are now supporting the idea that we should stop supporting Ukraine militarily by weapons, because it's prolonging the war and it's causing more suffer for the population. So it's prolonging the war, and we have immediately to conclude, not we, but I mean Russia and Ukraine, the peace agreement. But what it would mean according to logic of this approach, that Ukraine should accept the status quo, and then for Russia it will be beneficial. And of course, we know that Russian leadership decided to really conquer everything what Russia consider as its former maybe assets. And the second narrative is that because of quite difficult economic situation and social situation in Slovakia, now we have on our territory almost 90,000 Ukrainian refugees, mostly female refugees with children, that Ukrainians are taking Slovaks social benefits, and it's unjust. We should somehow stop doing this, and then the logic is that we would expel them after these Ukrainian refugees to Ukraine. So maybe now I finish, and in the discussion I would maybe explain in more detailed manner some statements which I made during my presentation. And of course, I would like to thank the organizers of this event. So both Alfred Ekin Institute for Citizenship and Globalization and European Center for Populism Studies for inviting me, and especially Kainat Shakil for preparation of this debate, her communication with us, preparing materials and preparing the scenario. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Grigorij, for the really wonderful insights, helping us to tease out the complexities and nuances in terms of Russia's role in Central European countries. It is more likely that we're going to extend our panel. And last but definitely not the least, let's welcome Tisha.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much. Thanks for the invitation. Hopefully you still have patience to hear me out. Let me try and share my screen and we can get the ball rolling. Can I just see a thumbs up if you can see my screen? Okay, perfect. As you can see, I'll try and tell you a little bit more about what Russia does in the Balkans. So far I've been studying very in-depth the Western Balkans, and by the Western Balkans we usually mean Albania, a NATO member, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kosovo, Serbia, North Macedonia and Montenegro. Both North Macedonia and Montenegro are NATO members now. But for the last few months, I've been studying in Bulgaria as well, and what Russia does in Bulgaria. So while here I'm focusing more on the Western Balkans, I'll try and make some connections to Bulgaria, because although Bulgaria is both an EU and NATO member, I believe Russia's sharp power is actually most intense here. I would also try and be very, very brief, give you the overview. But if you are interested in more of the narratives that we've been tracking in the Western Balkans and Bulgaria, the kind of like the modus operandi and so on, please do let me know, and I'll try and answer any questions I can, either here during the discussion time or afterwards over email or something. So kind of one of the guiding principles we've had back when I was at NATO Stockholm Center, and since then, is that Russia sees itself as a very much a senior stakeholder in what's happening in the Western Balkans. Its will is to really be part of the discourse here in one way or another. And it kind of has a few key priorities. One of it is defending what it believes is its sphere of influence against the West, protecting its corner. So this is the area here in Eastern Europe which Russia sees as its backyard, and really trying to be a global power. And I think these are strategic priorities for Russia as a whole, for all of its operations in Eastern Europe. But what makes it different in the Balkans is, on one side, the Balkans are very vulnerable to malign influence. It doesn't have to be external, it could be internal, it doesn't have to be from Russia, it could be from the PRC or many other states. But really, the Balkans are vulnerable, and it's an opportunity for Russia. And it's an opportunity for Russia to become a first-rate player in what it considers European security affairs, and really wants to see itself right up there with Germany, France, the UK. In the Balkans, specifically the Western Balkans, we've got many tensions, many conflicts simmering beneath the surface, and all of these are fertile ground for malign influence. And when I talk about malign influence, what I really mean is really this kind of winning the hearts and minds of the people through manipulation. So kind of like the essence of sharp power. It really, Russia really wants to have a say across all of these conflicts. So when we talk about conflicts, we've got, for example, Kosovo and Serbia, still Kosovo is not recognized by Russia in the UN Security Council and a few other states. We've got Bosnia and Herzegovina, which I think all of us are quite aware of how much of a of problems there are within Bosnia, including with Republika Srpska. We've got Montenegro, where kind of the population is polarized 50 by 50%. So you have about 50% who want to be part of NATO and about 50% who don't want to be part of NATO and want to be close to Russia. I think you've got Albania, which is a little bit safer on that side, but then Albania has Kosovo to think about. And then finally, you have North Macedonia that, for example, the Prespa agreement with where we talked about the name change of North Macedonia. That was something that Russia really utilized for its own gains. Being like, look at the West, it's making you really even change your name for the sake of you becoming a NATO member. Russia, one other reason why Russia is in the Western Balkans and really wants to be part of the big players in the Balkans is it sees a very kind of heavy Euro-Atlantic presence there. You've got several NATO bases as well in Albania. You've got both physical presence of Euro-Atlantic values, but also you've got quite a lot of soft power as well. And Russia see this as an opportunity to play an obstructionist role. It doesn't really have to do much. It can just be there, part of the discourse, and it's already making a problem out of the whole thing. I mean, we are talking about Russia's presence in the Western Balkans currently as well. And as I said at the beginning, a very big part of what Russia does is it uses the vulnerabilities within the Western Balkans. It's really exploiting what's out there. It doesn't really have to put a lot of effort. It's cheap. It's easy. It's really a place for Russia to leverage its position against the West. It's a tit for tat, kind of where Russia sees the West meddling. It's like, oh wait, I can meddle as well, and I can be part of this world. And it's really thinking of like really giving the West a taste of its own medicine. And we can see this in many of the small tensions and conflicts that I was just talking about. There has been kind of a historical movement of what Russia uses in terms of its manipulation and information influence activities. It used to be a lot about the orthodoxy, because quite a lot of these countries are Eastern Orthodox countries. Then during the Soviet times, what Russia was mainly using was indoctrination. However, former Yugoslavia wasn't part of the Soviet Union per se, but it was playing on the communist indoctrination. However, today, and I think since 2014, specifically, Russia is playing a new game. It's not bound by ideology or any kind of like normative aspirations anymore. It's free to do whatever it wants and whatever it wants. As I say, it can leverage really scarce resources, but get maximum payoff. As I say, it's not investing a lot. It's not like in Africa where it sends Wagner soldiers or anything like this. No, it's literally using the vulnerabilities within the energy sector, within the political sector, within the media sector, and really placing itself in the middle of all of these. And all of this allows Russia to have a great deal of room for maneuvering. It can negotiate with a variety of actors. It doesn't have to really be on one side or the other. So it doesn't really have to play with the actors that are typically on the left of the political spectrum, who are historically more socialist and more communist in their thinking. No, right now it's actually working quite a lot with the far left and far right as well. It can work with the business, it can work with the civil society, and really, as I say, leverage and maneuver between different stakeholders. There has also been quite of a evolution in what Russia does in the Balkans over the last maybe 30 years. During the 90s, it was mostly about engagement. That was, that was a time of the wars in Yugoslavia. Russia was diplomatically engaged. It was one of the states that kind of voted against NATO intervention in 1999. And that was a big thing for Russia, because up until today, it really feels humiliated that even though it said no in the Security Council, NATO still went and bombarded Serbia, what's today Serbia. Then kind of like between early 2000s up until like maybe 2010, 2014, we've had a little bit of retrenchment and relaunch. We had Russian peacekeepers withdrawing from Kosovo and Bosnia and Herzegovina. We had South Stream, which then went into Turk Stream, which then going back to South Stream, and now it's Turk Stream again, being revised and then closed and revised again. But it's one of Russia's main kind of focuses in the early 2000s. Interestingly, Russia didn't block NATO, Albania and Croatia becoming NATO members. Bulgaria also became a NATO member in 2004. However, with the new kind of like the new batch of NATO members, North Macedonia and Montenegro specifically, Russia was kind of using its star power to really make people not want it. Kind of again working on the on the back end of it all. And since 2014, we've got kind of like a send-off. Russia is mobilizing and has been mobilizing political and civil society actors in the region, meaning that it's really operating through a lot of proxies. And I think one of the previous speakers mentioned this about the other regions as well. It's one of Russia's favorite tools, really not doing the dirty job itself, but having people to do it for Russia. Russia-sponsored and pro-Russian media has really gained influence. And here I hear a lot about, Sputnik Serbia being operational in Serbia. We hear a lot about RT, although RT is not that popular because you don't have a local channel in the local languages. We've got Russia Beyond the headlines in Serbian. We had several what we call doctors newspapers in Serbia and Montenegro, which really look into kind of like alternative medicine and target the elderly population. You had a few media outlets in Montenegro during the golden years of Russian tourism in the country. But what's even more worrying and something that we found, and I can talk to you about if you are interested, actually Sputnik Serbia is not amongst the most popular outlets in the region. However, the narratives which Sputnik Serbia promotes, which are mostly anti-NATO, anti-EU narratives, they are very popular and they're being pushed forward by Serbian media outlets across the BCMC speaking area. So although although Russia-sponsored and Russia-owned media outlets are not amongst the most popular, pro-Russian media outlets are, and that's the worrying bit. We've got energy, the energy security sector being one of the most vulnerable to sharp power as well. We can see this right now with the sanctions. A lot of these nations are almost entirely dependent on Russia for their gas. So that's a big problem. Sorry, moving forward, I'm looking at the time. As I said, we kind of like when we were doing a lot of the research about Russia's footprint in the Balkans, we constantly thought and heard that Russia has complete control over the media. What we didn't realize until actually looking into and tracking the specific narratives was that we're not talking about Russia-owned media, we're talking about pro-Russian media, and really pro-Russian narratives being spread through Serbian media outlets. The toolbox of Russia, all of these, I think, are somehow connected to sharp power, if not the sharp power in terms of definition. Coercion is not so common, although it can be used. Russia has been known to use kind of like military or economic punishment in order to kind of like make countries in the region behave the way Russia wants them. Again, it's not the most common tool. However, cooptation and subversion are Russia's choice of tools. With cooptation, what we mean is Russia providing incentives to the so-called proxies, and here we mean politicians, businessmen, other like civil society organizations, media outlets, really creating relationships of dependence. Something that we couldn't prove per se, but we kind of like heard quite a lot, for example, was that Sputnik Serbia, the newsroom of Sputnik Serbia, which is entirely led by Serbian and regional journalists, is actually housed in a building which is owned by Gazprom. So kind of like this is a relationship of dependence. Again, we couldn't prove it 100% because there are no documents existing, but this is kind of like anecdotal proof. And then my most favorite tool is subversion. Really, and if you remember at the beginning, I talked to you about kind of some of the tensions and the conflicts which are simmering in the background in this region. And through subversion, through the use of, I don't talk about disinformation, I talk about information influence activities. So through the use of information influence activities, we've got Russia really trying to influence the society as a whole, undermining their trust in institutions, which is very, very low, almost non-existent, and kind of like polarize society even further. And I'm talking about a very polarized societies here, and really making these countries even more vulnerable than they already are. As I said, kind of like trying to go more in depth in the three tools. With coercion, we don't have little green men on the ground. However, we do have a lot of cyber attacks. For example, the Montenegrin government is constantly being targeted by cyber attacks. We talk about support from nationalistic groups. A lot of the local far-right movements are being one way or another supported by Russia, and this is quite visible. We've got tourism. A very interesting scandal was from Montenegro a few years back with the kind of the ban on importing Montenegrin wine in Russia because of some kind of a substance which was completely falsified. Montenegro was the seaside of a choice for many Russians until a certain point in a few years back, again because of other political movements. And in a lot of these cases, Russia has been really trying to coerce and use its positions economically or another way to get, for example, the wine Russian tourists to go back to Montenegro. Cooptation, subversion. I really talked about these. Again, if you have questions, you can talk to me about them afterwards. Cooptation is very serious in Republika Srpska, where the president of Republika Srpska sees himself as the best friend to Putin. Subversion. Here we're really talking about an easy in for Russia, using a lot of information campaigns, a lot of supporting for marginalized groups within the civil society and societal sector. And I think the whole point of all of this is really making the West look very weak, making the West look very not the right choice for these countries. I've got some pictures. Kind of like the instruments that Russia uses are diplomatic alliances. Oh, sorry, I'm 20 minutes in. We've got diplomatic alliances mainly with Serbia and Republika Srpska. And I had a friend of mine who called the relationship between Serbia and Russia kind of like friends with benefits situation. So it's not the given diplomatic alliance, but the two countries have been seen to be working quite a lot together. We do have a little bit of arms transfer, but it's not that much. However, it could be used as a sharp power tool as well. We've got a lot of humanitarian assistance. There is a center in Niš in Serbia. There had been talks about such a humanitarian center being created in Bosnia as well. And these centers have been seen before to really be a home for spices, let's say it this way, rather than providing only humanitarian help. Economic connections, I talked a lot about that a little bit. Interestingly enough, in public polls, a lot of people in the Balkans believe that Russia is their biggest economic partner, and it isn't. It's very, very far from the truth, but that's part of the whole really narrative, and using small economic connections to boost the position. We've got a lot of influencing over domestic affairs. We saw this with North Macedonia and the change of the name. We saw it with Montenegro's wish to join NATO. We see it constantly in Bulgaria currently with kind of like the political crisis and so on. The influence over domestic affairs is both official through official partnerships with political parties, but also unofficial. Religious ties is a topic that international people really love to talk about because they see the Orthodox Church as a very strong instrument. It is. However, there are certain aspects where we've got the Orthodox Church being very, very strong in Serbia and Montenegro, and not so strong in other places. As I said, we've got links with civil society, although these are not that obvious. A very cool example is again with Putin's bikers doing annual crosses of the Balkans on their motorbikes with the Russian flags and so on. And as I talked about the instruments in the information space, where we've got Russian-funded media, we've got Serbian media spreading Russian narratives, and so on. And I'll stop here. And as I said, I can talk to you more about kind of like the narratives if there was interest.
Thank you so much, Tisha, and our other speakers, Viktor and also Grigorij. And now we're going to open the floor for our audience for any questions, and we probably have around 50 minutes for questions. So we got the first question from Martin. A quick general question for any of the speakers. All of you have alluded in a way to a sort of disconnect between countries in Central and Eastern Europe and countries in Western Europe on the toolkit that Russia has been using for past decades. Is it your impression that in recent years or since the invasion, really, that is disconnect is in the process of amending itself, or are there still existing misapprehensions? So this is a question for panel speakers.
If I can start, then of course, I mean, disconnection of Central European countries from their Western allies is the main goal of the Russian soft power, and it's the main goal of Russian foreign policy. I mean, Russia, especially after Brexit, considers this option, even organizational disconnection, not only, I mean, on the level of policies, but also the level of membership as a possible. But many things depends on the configuration of national political elites. In some countries, the foreign policy is it's a platform for national consensus. In some countries, there are discrepancies between political actors. So far, Russia wasn't very successful in these efforts, but I mean, they are not losing hope, because in some countries, as in Slovakia, there are some political forces with quite substantial support of the voters. And now, for example, Mr. Fico, whom I mentioned, he is promising to change the foreign policy orientation of the state after the next elections. So it means that the goal is still here to disconnect. And of course, the support for such political forces is de facto provided by Russia.
Maybe very short, I could provide a short example. Quite often when some with outlets of Kremlin disinformation or propaganda presenting topic about NATO in Baltic states or NATO in Lithuania, we're using very interesting formula. I could say we're not talking about Lithuania as member state, but we're talking about Lithuania and NATO, which is quite interesting example from my point of view.
I hope I understand your question right. Please let me know if I'm not. I think you're asking whether, since the invasion of Ukraine, the West and the region each of us has been talking about have kind of like tried to get closer to one another. If that is the question, I'd say I think the West has seen the Balkans as a target from malign actors, and I think the West really wants to play a bigger role. However, I think, if, for example, with the European Union, the fact that there is no clear path for the Western Balkans to be part of the European Union, I think this way they're actually reaching the opposite, and they're making the Western Balkans feel even more lost and even more left out, and maybe even getting closer to Russia. I really hope this was your question.
Thanks for the question, Martin. And we have three people raising their hands, Boland, Andrew, and Kynite. So let's start with Boland. Boland, sorry, you're on mute.
Thank you, Fan. Thank you very much for this interesting and eye-opening presentations. I appreciate the presentations of all panelists. My question is to Grigorij. Dear Grigorij, could we define the use of sharp power elements and tactics by Putin regime as an extension or continuation of conventional warfare in the framework of Russian revanchist and revisionist geopolitical interests and its security and expansionist goals? Thank you.
If I understood correctly, your question was about how COVID was used, or maybe?
No, sharp power elements and tactics by Putin regime as an extension or continuation of conventional warfare.
Well, I think that I think that Russia's intention is definitely to use some elements going beyond of this sharp power toward the countries which are members of European Union and NATO. And here I would use this example of this ultimatum. Do you remember how Russia I think it was in December, Russia presented ultimatum in which it demanded NATO to return to 1997. Well, I think it's something which, of course, it's not the announcement of the war. It's not the start of the military operations, but I can imagine, it's just now my speculation, that if Ukraine wouldn't be so successful in struggling against Russia, and if, God forbid, Russia would conquer Ukraine during the first stage of this war, then I'm more than sure that Russian troops would move to the western border of Ukraine, maybe would incorporate Ukrainian army into the Russian army, and then again to present this ultimatum. And in this case, it would be ultimatum which not only theoretically, but practically could be supported by some military measures against some countries, maybe the weakest countries of the NATO or European Union, and maybe even use of the military force of spectacular occurrences, for example, bombardment of some places. Yeah, so fortunately, I think that Ukraine protected us from this scenario, fortunately, but analyzing the positions of Russian officials, it's clear that if they would have opportunity, they wouldn't hesitate to use even, steps of conventional military activities.
How could you combine these military activities with these sharp power elements in the hands of Putin regime?
Well, political measures, creation, adjusting the political scene in the countries to Russian ideas, forming their actors, agents, for example, inside military forces. We still have some pockets of people who are thinking in the way which are very close to Russian perception of, in military forces. Administration, fortunately, is doing something against them, but they are still here. So it means that it's on this stage, it's just a preparation of something. It's definitely the method of sharp power, but on the next stage, according to this idea, these people would act as a tools of military activities. And there are some paramilitary groups in our countries, in Slovakia, Slovak conscripts, so-called, and they are showing absolutely clearly that if the war between NATO and Russia would start, they will be on the side of Russia, not on the side of their nation.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question. And I think the distinction of sharp power, soft power, and hard power has definitely threaded along our panel discussions at the very beginning. So let's move on to our next question. Andrew?
Thank you. Thank you for a fascinating conversation. Yeah, I'm still trying to get my head around the idea of sharp power and how it's different from the traditional propaganda as a means of winning over a population. I mean, we've had other types of propaganda decades past, whether dropping leaflets from airplanes or broadcasters such as in World War II, people we knew as Axis Sally or Tokyo Rose, broadcasting with music and false news to try to influence publics against the war. It was not called sharp power then, it's traditional propaganda warfare. So I was thinking, if it's more a case of using of having an ideological warfare beyond trolls and bots on social media, but drawing on underlying concepts of what our societies are and trying to subvert those, that Russia is an interesting example as it shifted, let's say, from the Soviet Union, from the USSR, where its propaganda warfare or use of sharp power in some ways was to try to destabilize ethnic nations and suppress ethnic nationalism in favor of promoting a type of economic class identity, and by doing so destabilize the sense that there is an ethnic identity to a state. When the USSR shifted to Russia and lost its identity as having transnational economic class solidarity, it latched onto ethnic national identity and found that as a tool to subvert the growing transnational identities that were existing, whether within the EU, where ethnic identity was set aside for a more stable environment where people could cross borders, there was free trade, and states like Ukraine could exist containing multiple ethnicities that did not classify themselves as separate nations. And so perhaps is this an example of sharp power where it now uses ethnic national identity to both subvert unions such as the EU, while at the same time drawing support for its own claims to have a right to own the nation of Russians that live within the false borders of this state called Ukraine, who really should be able to follow their ethnic identities and be part of Russia or be part of whichever ethnic area or ethnic nation they claim to be. And by promoting that that story, that narrative, it's created something which is seductive to other ethnic national states, many of which are in the Balkans and Central Europe, whether it's Hungary or whether it is even Poland, or in the case of actually for Viktor as coming from a state which also separated from Czechoslovakia based upon ethnic national identity. Yeah, how seductive is this as a tool, and is this a tool of sharp power? And how seductive is it at subverting the current international order and perhaps a post-Ukraine war national order where there will be questions, continuing questions about what makes, how do we see ourselves as societies and where do we see our allegiances? I'll stop there.
Thanks, Andrew, for the comment and also the question. I'm a little bit cautious about the time, so Kainet, would you like to ask the question as well, so that our panel speakers will be able to respond to both of the questions?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Fan. Thank you to all the panelists today for the presentation. It was very insightful to learn about how Russia's activities are impacting the nearby regions to the country. So my question is to all the panelists. It's open to any one of them answering it. From what I understand and see after all the presentation, it seems that Russia's sharp power interventions are sort of a retaliation or a response to West's attitude or presentation of ideas of Russia. So in this context, if we continue or West continues with the same narrative or attitudes towards Russia, how can sharp power be countered, or how can Russia be engaged in a meaningful manner that it doesn't need to respond in such an aggressive manner to, let's say, the West, which it sees as an enemy at this stage. So thank you.
Maybe I could start to answer to, or try to answer to both questions. In some candidates, of course, it's very complicated topics and it's hard to answer shortly. But in Lithuania, for example, with my students in Vilnius University and in military academy, we had a lot talking about the similarities and differences between Soviet propaganda and modern Kremlin propaganda or modern Russian propaganda. And I personally like this theory of Peter Pomerantsev and also Edward Lucas, what main difference is that today we have no ideological struggle as was in during Soviet time or during Cold War. And in fact, today Russia not trying to to prove that Russia is on this right side or have this true, but trying to attack principle of truth. And I like this title of the book of Peter Pomerantsev, Nothing is True and Everything is Possible. And here we could find this connection to sharp power. It's not only a struggle of propaganda or struggle of values or so on. Russia trying to make this information house in Western world too, and maybe firstly in Western world. And in this information house, people just could lose position, could not imagine what is true, what is not. And of course, it's a destructive thing for our societies.
If I may, I'll try and answer the last question first and then move towards the other one. I think in the Balkans, Russia sees itself as responding to the West moving towards the East. It makes sense. However, what the West does very badly is communicating. And I say this as being part of the West. It's the West doesn't feel the need to constantly talk about what it's been doing, kind of like the things that are good for the local people, and what the local people are left with are very high level politics where the European says, oh, these countries cannot move forward with EU integration because of X, Y, and Z, and we have protocols and we have procedures and so on. It doesn't really manage to talk about, how, for example, the EU managed to negotiate a deal with the car plates between Serbia and Kosovo, for example. If you talk to local people, they wouldn't know entirely how the situation got resolved. They'll just know how it got resolved. So I think the West needs to really learn how to communicate with the ordinary people, quote unquote. So how to really try and talk about its advances, its cooperation, about the fact that we really are trying to help the civil society grow, work with institutions to make them more trustworthy and so on. I think this is one step forward. I don't know whether this will necessarily be a response to Russia's aggression, as you put it, but it most certainly be a way forward. I think at least for the local people in the Balkans to understand the value that the West is trying to do for them. In terms of the other question, I think you are spot on about the question of the ethnic role in these conflicts. And I wasn't born during the Soviet times, so I don't know how it was back then. But from what's happening right now, Russia is really playing on the on ethnic tensions, as I mentioned. For example, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, it's really siding with Republika Srpska, talking about how Russia is the only friend of the Slavhood people, of like, you know, is the only protector of the Orthodox Church, and really trying to make people more to kind of like get them against one another from within. Yes, it is subversion. It is disrupting from the inside, and again, the vulnerability is already there. These countries are, I mean, Bosnia and Herzegovina is made of 3 entities, so kind of the vulnerability is there, and Russia is exploiting it to the best of its powers.
If I can maybe complete this series of answer to the questions, to the beginning of the first question and to the second question. How soft power is different from propaganda. I mean, propaganda is a part of soft power, but soft power is a systemic phenomenon. It's about destruction of the system. Liberal democratic regime, it's a system. The current so-called geopolitical arrangement in Europe, NATO and European Union, I mean, and other things. So it means that soft power is specifically oriented to the destruction of something which the state considers as unacceptable. So it's really something systemic. It's not only propaganda. Propaganda is part of this. Then the second question, I don't think that the word retaliation is really the best. I mean, the West didn't do anything to what Russia has had to retaliate. I mean, the narrative that the West was moving to the East, I mean, the NATO, European Union. No, it's a free nations liberated from the dominant, liberated from the communist regime and liberated from the dominance of the former hegemon, voluntarily and freely decided that they will be part of the European family of nations. And then Russia is retaliating to this. I mean, the hostile attitude to the outer world and specifically against the West is a tradition of Russian foreign policy, either in pre-Soviet time, during the Soviet Union, and unfortunately now. And meaningful involvement of the Russia into interactions with the West, I think that unless this regime is sitting in the Kremlin, is simply not possible.
Thank you so much for the questions and also the excellent response. And we're going to wrap it up over here. Thank you so much for your attendance and our excellent panel speakers. Please be reminded that our video is recorded and the recording will be uploaded on YouTube. Feel free to go back if you want. And last but not the least, please give our panel speakers and all the attendants a round of applause if you can. You have been amazing. So thanks for attending today, and hopefully we'll be able to see you next week at our next session.
Thank you so
Thank you very much.
Thank you a lot.
Bye-bye. It was a big pleasure. Bye.